Hey guys, so about a week ago, conservative influencer Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and many of us are absolutely devastated, including our very own president.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. Can I ask you a question? How are you holding up over the last 3.5 days?
I think very good, and by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Absolutely devastated. Quick side note, I can't be the only one that thinks of Baby Spencer and iCarly when he dances like that, right? But some people aren't as distraught about Kirk's death. In fact, some are going so far as to celebrate it online. And it just makes me wonder, how did the temperature get so hot? Who caused it? And can we ever go back to how things were? Is it even worth trying? Those are some tough questions. Who the hell is the time to go through and figure out all of that? To determine how things got so crazy, we're gonna have to look to the past, which means picking a place to start. And while we could go back to the first time a caveman beat another over the head with a club, I'm going to start our timeline of political temperature in the election season of 2016. Why? Because whether you love him or hate him, one of the candidates was a little bit divisive.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. Hillary wants to essentially abolish the Second Amendment. If she gets to pick her judges, nothing you can do, folks. Although the Second Amendment people, maybe there is, I don't know. We're gonna build the wall. We have no choice. We have no choice. So, we're gonna build it. Who's gonna pay for the wall?
And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Whatever you want. Grab them by the pussy.
From the very beginning, his policy was focused on limiting immigration by building the wall, fixing trade with China, and renegotiating bad deals. This alone doesn't sound too contentious, but when some of his early statements on justifying his immigration policies were talking about how Mexico was sending rapists and criminals across the border and proposing banning all Muslim people from entering the United States, things began to heat up a little bit. Additionally, prior to his presidency, Trump didn't seem like much of a political person, and compared to any of the recent presidential candidates, he wasn't very qualified for the job. Specifically in the 2016 election, he had neither the law degree nor the previous Senate experience that Hillary Clinton had. But that ended up being one of Trump's greatest strengths, and it's one of the things that people like about him the most. While the Democrats saw Trump's inexperience as potentially devastating, many saw it as a chance to finally root out some of the awful corruption that's infected the government. Putting policy aside for a second, Trump also had a tendency to do and say things that other people wouldn't, and you may notice that some of these clips are out of context. For example, at the end of the Mexico one, Trump said, "good people."
They're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
But that's the point. The political temperature doesn't care about the context of the clips, and this only proved to further the divide between the left and the right. But despite Donald Trump's controversy-filled campaign, he was elected, and although there were some minor fluctuations in the coming year, the political temperature was actually relatively stable. That is, until 2020. In the summer of 2020, the death of George Floyd led to an immediate rise of Black Lives Matter. But BLM is something that the left and the right understand very differently, and to really understand the effect that it had, we need to clear up the biggest misconception of BLM, that it was a single thing. When most people talk about BLM, they're referring to one of three things. The first BLM is a protest, which many on the left support, and many on the right are either indifferent to or mildly support. The second is the organization, which is pretty mixed on the left and hated on the right. And the third is the riots, which are pretty much universally disavowed. These three BLMs operate in a sort of a Venn diagram where some of the protesters rioted, some supported the organization, and some did both. But think about what this means if you're to think of Black Lives Matter as a single thing. To the right, those that support BLM are supporting the burning of cities and the destruction of property, whereas many of the protests didn't even go so far as civil disobedience. And to the left, anyone who wouldn't support BLM could be easily lumped in as a racist, even if they're mainly opposed to the riots and destruction of property. This also led to counterculture movements like the All Lives Matter and Back the Blue movements, which only caused further division. And at this point, the temperature's starting to get really hot. I'm not sure how we're gonna outdo this. I'm not gonna spend too much time on this one because we've got a lot of video to get to. On January 6, 2021, Donald Trump held a rally in Washington, D.C., near the nation's capital, protesting the results of the 2020 election. Many conservative figures participated, and there was a large coordinated effort to get people to the rally. In fact, our boy Charlie actually played a part in busing people to this rally. However, the protest got out of hand, and eventually some of the rally attendees began to march on the Capitol, the goal being to stop Mike Pence from certifying the ballots and change the election result, which isn't really something he had the power to do, but whatever. Anyway, this went on for a few hours with some of the intruders pooping on Nancy Pelosi's desk, some occupying the main chamber where the senators would have certified the ballots, and others tangling with Capitol police officers. At the end of it all, Trump made a speech telling the intruders to go home, and that was pretty much the end of it. Many who committed crimes on the Capitol grounds were eventually identified and convicted, and many received prison time. January 6 was something that at the time was universally disavowed, with Trump's approval rating reaching its lowest ever at 34% in the aftermath. As one of the largest fault lines in US politics today, January 6 turned the heat up to a fever pitch. And then, after the fact, Trump pardoned everyone involved. And while a bunch of other stuff happened between January 6th and now, such as the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, the attempted assassination of Trump, the second attempted assassination of Trump, the shooting of Melissa Hortman and her husband, and now the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I can't help but feel that this is somewhat inevitable. Even back on January 6th, things were already getting real hot, and water doesn't boil on its own, so let's find someone to blame. Well, I have an answer that'll piss everyone off, because after looking back at some of the most inflammatory events of the past decade, if there's one thing that's clear is that it always takes two to tango. To frame the increase in temperature as purely left or right is not only disingenuous, but also just plain stupid. And it's important to remember that escalation isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes protests, civil disobedience, and even wars are framed as necessary to defend people's beliefs and rights. And although I entirely disavow the events of January 6, I can't fault those that attempted to overturn the election results that they believed were stolen. They are, of course, absolute idiots for believing the guy who thinks windmills are mass murder machines.
Have birds, you want to see a bird cemetery? Just go under a windmill, you see thousands of birds dead.
And can't do math at a third grade level.
Well, one of the things they're going to be talking about pretty soon are the tremendous drop in drug prices. You know, we've cut drug prices by 1,200, 1,300, 1,400, 1,500%.
Brother, open the schools! But regardless, the escalation itself could be necessary if a tyrannical government subverted the will of the people. So maybe a more useful question to ask is, who is responsible for the violence that results from tensions being so high? And now we're gonna need to get a little bit politically incorrect, because there is one group specifically in the United States that is responsible for disproportionately large amounts of political violence. One group that outpaces all others in acts of violence. And that, of course, is trans people. I'm just kidding, it's the right. And if you don't believe me, read the studies, ask Grok, ask ChatGPT, there is so much data to support this. Some relevant resources worth mentioning are the 2020 brief from CSIS and the PNAS comparison from 2022, along with the Cato Institute report released after Kirk's death. Another image that's been floating around is a chart from the ADL, but nobody likes them, so focus on the other ones. There also was a DOJ study that concurred with this, although that seems to have mysteriously disappeared recently. I'm sure that doesn't have anything to do with what our elected officials are saying right now. There's also an image floating around posted by the White House Deputy Press Secretary that shows a massive increase in far-left violence. And like, did you even read your own study? Even excluding the Vanish study, regardless of the data you look at, even the one by those jerks at the ADL, left-wing violence constitutes a fraction of right-wing violence. And that's not necessarily a bad thing either. I think it was Abraham Lincoln who once said, in many cases, having the capacity for violence makes people much more willing to listen to reason. Was it Lincoln? Someone said it. The point is, those that regularly engage in politics have a responsibility to be aware of what galvanizes their audience to violence and be careful with rhetoric surrounding those topics. Which is why it drives me absolutely crazy when people like Tim Pool are constantly tweeting about civil war. Just look at the reaction to Kirk's death. You have many high-profile figures on the left disavowing the political violence and those on the right calling for war. Especially with the context of right-leaning people seeming to have a higher propensity to commit violent acts, this is a really bad look. And although this wasn't in the script, recently 2 high school students were run over and murdered by a teen who had been stalking them for months. And after killing them, the suspect went live on YouTube and had this to say.
I gotta get drop P5 tonight.
Hey, whenever Maria sees the pizza guy come, better think of Charlie Kirk for making fun of his fucking death. Stupid ass clown.
Wait, what?
Just remember that.
If your blood doesn't boil seeing this, are you even human? This is a guy empowered by the Civil War rhetoric that these scumbags are using that then used Kirk's death as an excuse to kill people. Anyway, back to the video. And while a bunch of random no-follower accounts on Twitter can certainly drive people towards paranoia by yelling stuff like this, imagine instead if that message came from someone with a massive platform, specifically one that explicitly targets young and impressionable people. And you might see where I'm going with this. Charlie Kirk's rhetoric radicalized many people, and in the end, he fell victim to the very political violence that he spent years downplaying. And to be clear, I don't celebrate Kirk's death, and I feel for his family and those who had close ties with him. And personal feelings aside, the political consequences of Kirk's death are bound to be incredibly negative. But Charlie himself is not without blame in this age of political dissent and violence. Charlie's a man who personally bragged about busing people to January 6th. He claimed to be a free speech warrior, but was more than happy to selectively exclude any debates against students that disproved his narratives. Did you see the latest South Park episode? He thought kids should see public executions.
In fact, I even think that we should bring back, public executions on certain people. No, but think about it. I think that, and you guys should laugh, it should be public, it should be quick, it should be televised. By the way, you could force the government to watch it. You could have, brought to you by Coca-Cola.
Well, I guess the monkey's paw kind of curled on that one, huh? He also made unsubstantiated claims about DEI, black people, and the civil rights movement. And especially this airline one, the FAA requires you to have 1,500 hours of flight time before you can even fly for major airlines. And while the requirements may be slightly different for helicopter pilots, to claim that this has anything to do with race is entirely disingenuous. I'm not claiming Kirk was intentionally racist, but his rhetoric certainly empowered racist ideas. There's this fact sheet going around disproving some of these quotes that Kirk said, and I just think that if you need a massive sheet talking about why you're not a racist, maybe you should think about why so many people seem to think that way, but anyway. Later on, in the event where an assailant attacked Paul Pelosi, Kirk joked that a patriot should go bail out the person that bludgeoned Pelosi with a hammer.
If some amazing patriot out there in San Francisco or the Bay Area wants to really be a midterm hero, someone should go and bail this guy out. I bet his bail's like 30 or 40,000 bucks. Bail him out and then go ask him some questions.
Keep in mind that Paul had to get skull surgery after he was beaten, and the attacker stated that he'd hoped to hold Nancy Pelosi hostage and that he would break her kneecaps if she lied. And if that's not enough, he literally called for Joe Biden to be executed for crimes that he committed.
I mean, Joe Biden is a bumbling, dementia-filled Alzheimer's corrupt tyrant who should honestly be put in prison and or given the death penalty for his crimes against America.
What crime should he be executed for? Oh. And while Charlie had inflammatory rhetoric pertaining to many groups on the left, the one that really stands out, even after his death, is the attacks on trans people. And I hate that I have to spend time talking about such a tiny percent of the US population, but this is how it's going to be spun, so here we go. Firstly, I think it's important that we understand the nuanced position that Kirk had on transgender people while he was alive.
What does being trans even mean? It means you need a therapy. The one issue I think that is so against our senses, so against the natural law, and dare I say, a throbbing middle finger to God, is the transgender thing happening in America. We must ban trans-affirming care the entire country.
Safe to say he wasn't a fan. But after Kirk's death, the efforts by some voices on the right to frame the shooting as being some kind of transgender problem has been absolutely insane. So let's break this down in order. First, Tyler Robinson, the supposed shooter himself, was said to be infected with trans ideology. This was first reported by conservative influencer Steven Crowder. According to the tweet, all cartridges have engraved wording on them expressing transgender and anti-fascist ideology. Alright, well, let's see about that. So, the first bullet said, "Notice his bulges. Oh whoa, what's this? This is a 4chan meme, not trans or Antifa adjacent." The second said, "Hey fascist, catch up over down down down," which is from a video game, Helldivers 2. And for those who don't know, the whole joke in this game is the same as its source material, Starship Troopers, where the main characters of the film are actually the fascists themselves. In other words, he was playing a fascist in the video game. So while it doesn't prove the shooter was Antifa, it does prove that he was a Helldiver. Bum, 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 bum. Anyway, next bullet. The third bullet was a quote from a song saying, "Oh, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Ciao, Ciao." This song was initially used by anti-fascist movements, but has in the past been co-opted by other groups, including a group on the right called the Groypers, who are a fringe group under the leadership of the self-proclaimed Nazi named Nick Fuentes. This is probably the biggest clue that the shooter was on the left, but on its own, it's certainly not conclusive. And there's nothing trans about this bullet. Next, the last bullet read, "If you read this, you are gay." A bit anticlimactic, I guess, but yeah, no trans ideology or Antifa messaging on this one either. So, trans ideology on the bullets was a freaking lie, huh? One other possibility is that some idiot saw the TRN mark on the bullets and thought that meant something related to trans people, when in reality that was just the branding left by the Turkish company Turan Ammunition. Like, bro, guns are supposed to be your thing, right? Come on. So the bullet framing seemed to be a bit of a dud, but then it's now come out that Tyler Robinson's roommate, who is apparently instrumental to his arrest, is trans. What evidence do we have of this? Well, the shooter's mom said so in the court documents. That's it. That's literally all we have, even now. The roommate hasn't personally said anything about gender identity, so we by no means have any confirmation that they even are trans. And it's worth keeping in mind that even if they are trans, they're fully cooperating with the investigation. So to frame this as some sort of trans issue is just spurious at best. So we started out with the trans or trans-adjacent shooter, which turned out to be a lie. Then we had trans-adjacent bullets, which turned out to be a lie. And now we have a trans roommate, which again has not been proven at all. And amidst this trans panic, there have also been many myths circulating claiming that trans people commit a vast amount more crimes than cisgender people.
But statistically, the trans population has been prone to violence. That's not villainizing, that's reality. The trans clan has a militant wing, and it's out for blood.
Again, this is just not true. Ask Grok, ask ChatGPT, look at the data, it's just factually not true. To summarize, trans people are a tiny percentage of the population, and even when normalizing to their small size, they don't commit crimes on anywhere near the rampant scale that people like Jesse Waters would have you believe. And Waters' response was far from the worst. Here's Jesse Kelly on Twitter saying, a reminder that while the online trans world was forming terror cells, the FBI was telling Facebook to ban your account for questioning the COVID vaccine. Yeah, bro, so according to Trump, trans people are too unstable to serve their country by being in the military at all, and yet they're stable and competent enough to form terror cells. Sure, man. I still never understood this military angle. Like, if you enlist a trans woman, you're getting strength above that of an average biological woman, and you're likely paying them less than a man. Isn't that what Trump would call a good trade deal? But enough about trans people, because believe it or not, there's an even more specific target of hatred after Kirk's murder, one that I can personally guarantee hasn't even so much as thought about the Kirk assassination, because he's already dead. That's right, somehow 5 years after his death, George Floyd is still catching strays. And to be fair, I do see why some people are using Floyd as an analog for this situation. Both Charlie and George died in public with their deaths being recorded on video. Both died extrajudicially, meaning neither was legally sentenced to death, and the deaths of both of them led to political outrage. Also, in some cosmic twist of fate, they happen to have the same birthday. But despite the similarities, the most important difference separating these incidents is that Charlie Kirk's murder was carried out by some random dude, whereas George Floyd's murder was carried out by an officer of the law. And yeah, but the fentanyl in his system. Look, man, you're free to argue with the two independent autopsies all you want, but if after watching the video, you don't think that the police officer kneeling on the man's neck had anything to do with him coincidentally passing away right after, I don't know what to tell you. Whether it was the drugs that killed him and the dude kneeling on his neck merely accelerated his death, or the other way around, frankly, I don't give a shit. The point is, Floyd's death, along with Breonna Taylor's unjustified death at the hands of another cop a few months earlier, are what spurred on the protests in 2020. Anyway, due to the similarities of the deaths, I've been seeing plenty of people online implying that they deserve praise for not rioting in the streets after Kirk's killing, and that if there were less moral people like those on the left, they would be out rioting and getting revenge. Which is so funny because, bro, rioting against what? Who are we doing it against? The guy that shot Kirk? At the time of making this video, we still haven't even confirmed his political affiliation, much less his motive for carrying out the assassination. I mean, yeah, dude, he was probably one on the left, but he's not tied to Antifa or any other groups that we've seen. Compare that to the protests in 2020, which, regardless of how you feel about them, had a very clear target: fighting racial injustice. I don't know what you could possibly be rioting for in the case of Kirk's death. The conflation of the circumstances of the deaths of Kirk and Floyd is not only dishonest, but also incredibly common, especially amongst influencers. And on the topic of influencers, I want to take a quick detour and spend a bit of time going through some of the statements made by YouTuber Shoe on Head. Shoe is someone who regularly takes shit from both the left and the right, but I thought her video was pretty good and emotional, so we're gonna cover it. This video is already insanely long, so if you want to see the full context of her statements, links in the description. Also, to be clear, I do like Shoe and I harbor no ill will towards her, but I do think that her video illustrates some of the points that I'm trying to make very well. So let's get into it.
On September 10th, Charlie Kirk was giving a talk at Utah Valley University, and out of nowhere he was dead, live, in front of a bunch of college kids, in front of his wife and his 2 children.
Okay, first off with the kids thing, that's just misinformation. I've yet to see any evidence that Erica or either of Kirk's kids were at the event. I'm pretty sure this stemmed from a BBC article that spread this claim, but that has since been corrected, and Erica herself hasn't even said anything about it. And the kids thing is especially crazy when it comes from some of these pundits, because come on, bro, you don't care about the kids, you care that it's Kirk's kids, someone you were familiar with. You don't care about Melissa Hortman's 2 kids that were left parentless after both their parents were killed in the political shooting shooting 2 months ago. You don't care about Kilmar Abrego Garcia's 3 kids, one of which has autism, as the Trump administration has deported him illegally to a foreign prison and is now pressing charges against him for a crime that is almost mathematically impossible for him to have committed. And most of all, you don't care about George Floyd's 5 kids who are now left fatherless after his death to an officer of the law who is trying to arrest him on suspicion of a counterfeit $20 bill. So no, don't pretend to care about kids just because your feelings are hurt this time around.
His wife deserves to go too. Y'all keep on talking about his wife and kids. They need to go too because they're carrying on that mentality and that lineage. Like, get rid of the whole family. I'm so sorry. Why did you guys stop with him?
There were thousands of videos like that. Some of these people posting with their full names and faces, with hundreds and thousands of likes. Thousands of tweets celebrating it with 500,000 likes. And it's important to remember that all of those likes are a real person.
I don't know about that, bro. The bots are out there. But bots aside, I absolutely agree with Shu here. Some of these clips of people celebrating Kirk's death are absolutely despicable. But I've seen just as many memes mocking George Floyd's death, and those are just as disgusting. And the Hortman's deaths too? Remember when a sitting Senator Mike Lee joked about their deaths? At least with Mike Lee's one, there's an actual joke, and this joke isn't just haha, you're dead. But either way, to make jokes like this and then get upset when the left memes on Kirk is snowflake behavior. While you can claim this is whataboutism, I think it's important that we either agree that this is acceptable or it isn't. And while I personally tend to enjoy dark humor and have laughed at memes about both Kirk and George Floyd, I can understand those that see that kind of dark humor as bad taste and reject it. But we need to be principled in our stance. And now we see the same people who mocked George Floyd's death getting upset at people mocking Kirk's. And it's pretty telling here when Steven Crowder says it's specifically bad when you advocate for assassinations of conservative figures, isn't it?
Charlie Kirk was not a healthcare CEO, he was not a powerful politician, and let me be 100% clear, I'm not saying this to say that it's okay when those people are murdered. My point is that those are positions of power that most people cannot relate to. Like, the average person is just so far removed from that world. But I think what happened to Charlie is hitting differently because, like I said on Twitter, he was just a f***ing guy.
Like, don't you see all of these things can apply to George Floyd's death too?
I'm friends with people who are friends with Charlie, and I see how they are completely broken about this. Seeing them like this, and then at the same time my other friends posting shit like, rip bozo. Because if it's now normalized to just murder people who disagree with you politically, we don't have a society. Like, that's it. It's over. And are we really allies if we agree on, like, taxes, but don't agree on the sanctity of human life? Overnight, you stop being so selfish, nihilistic. You stop having utopian fantasies of wanting to live in a post-capitalist society. And all you want is for the world to be safe. For the world to be safe and normal.
Like, how do you think the average black person felt after an officer knelt on a guy's neck and we have it on video of the man dying over a counterfeit $20 bill? You think they felt very safe?
I just hope for the sake of this country that political violence does not become normalized, does not become a thing. I really don't want to see that happen. I don't want to see retaliation. I don't want to see us fall into a civil war. I don't know, this has all been extremely blackpilling.
Can't you see political violence is normalized? You think Kirk's assassination alone turned the temperature up to 1,000,000 degrees? Can't you see that it's been that high? It was that high when George Floyd was killed. It was that high when the Hortmans were killed a few months ago. And it was that high when Kirk was killed too. And yet here people choose to get indignant about the memes and jokes. Having selective empathy for only when one of our own gets memed on just because you knew him is part of what makes the left so angry, especially when people die unjustified deaths just like Kirk did. And yet in those other deaths, you barely hear a peep from the right. If you're only mad when someone you're close to dies, then you don't really care about death at all. You just selfishly care that you lost a friend, and I think that's pretty pathetic. Alright, we veered a little bit off track here, but let's bring it back to what we should do to fix all this. If there's one thing to take away from this video, it's that this isn't a uniquely left or right problem. Imagine for a sec if China declares war on the United States and we fight back, justifiably so, and after we go back and forth for a while, China comes around and says, it's up to us to end the war, and we're responsible for bringing things back to normal, but they're gonna keep attacking us until we do? Doesn't make much sense, does it? What's really required to actually bring things back to a comfortable temperature and to prevent any future political violence is for all of America to condemn the acts of violence and to stand united against them. To be clear, I don't care if you think Charlie Kirk was a piece of shit. I don't care if you think George Floyd was a piece of shit. You're welcome to have your own opinions about how they live their lives, and you can even think that their deaths may lead to a better outcome for the world overall. Your opinions on those things are not important. What is important is understanding that neither of them deserved to die in the way that they did, and the acts that led to their deaths are reprehensible. Unfortunately, we do have one rather large obstacle standing in the way of this resolution, and it's one that's been present throughout every single part of this video. After Kirk's death, a plethora of politicians and political figures on both sides came forward to condemn the violence and give their condolences to Kirk's family. The overwhelming theme, much like it was with the Hortman case, was a lowering of the political temperature and a call for unity. This is what Donald Trump, the man of the people, democratically elected representative of all Americans, had to say.
For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today.
Which is fair criticism. I don't think that Trump's ever called any of his political enemies names.
It's a choice between communism and freedom. This is communist, this is Marxist, this is fascist. There's a radical left Marxist, communist, fascist. She's a Marxist, she's a fascist.
Cool. And right after this, Vance went on to host Charlie Kirk's show and had this to say.
And while our side of the aisle certainly has its crazies, it is a statistical fact that most of the lunatics in American politics today are proud members of the far left.
So to summarize a little bit, the right is currently mad at some blue-haired dumbasses that are celebrating Kirk's death, which, although abhorrent and cringe, is protected free speech. Meanwhile, the left is mad at Trump for deporting US citizens, violating the Constitution, and constantly distracting from his incredibly close ties with the most notorious pedophiles of the modern age, possibly of all time. Donald Trump is someone who consistently would rather ask for forgiveness than permission, which is a philosophy that I can normally get behind, but not when breaking the rules hurts the American people. Trump's tariffs are a massive tax increase on the lower and middle classes, and there's still questions about whether what he's doing is even legal. He's someone who at best jokes and plays around with the idea of violating the Constitution, and at worst has violated the Constitution many times. And when our president, the leader of the free world, is happy to break the law and wantonly impose his agenda on others, it's not surprising to me that he could inspire those opposed to him to break the rules as well, even going so far as to kill their enemies. The truth is that without Donald Trump, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to ever bring the political temperature back down. Ha ha ha, you dumb communist SJW, you can't blame Trump for this. He's never assassinated anyone before, you idiot. Well, you're right. While Trump has certainly normalized breaking the rules in other ways, I will say that at least he's never leveraged his administration to extrajudicially kill people.
Breaking news as the Trump administration claims credit for striking yet another Venezuelan terrorist vessel, while evidence that the passengers actually are terrorists remains to be seen.
We're fucked.